everybody. It's great to see you here and to welcome you. My name is Luke Rapay. I'm an associate professor in the College of Education and Human Development here at Clemson University. And on behalf of my colleagues, including our Rutland Institute for Ethics Director, Dr. Bill McCoy, our co-director, Emily Elizabeth Costello, and my College of Education and FACE Committee colleague, Dr. Shanita Anderson. I'm pleased to welcome you here to tonight's event and to welcome you to our College of Education portion of the TIDE Conference. We have an exciting set of panelists and talks prepared for you this evening. The theme that we invited our panelists to address, each in their own way based on their perspective, their expertise, the way they engage with this issue in the field, it is as follows: innovation and responsibility, ethical considerations in the use of artificial intelligence in education. We're fortunate to hear from 3 field leaders about their important work and the intersections of artificial intelligence and education. We will briefly present each of our presenters or panelists at the outset of our time together just now. And then we'll just hear from each of them individually in turn. So we'll first hear from Dr. Danielle Harrow. Dr. Harrow is a professor of learning sciences and is the co-director of the Digital Media and Learning Labs in the Clemson University College of Education. Her current NSF-funded projects investigate co-designed data science curricula and their impact on rural elementary schools' data science practices. In 1920, she was a Watt Fellow at Clemson, investigating the potential of artificial intelligence in education. From 2013 to 2016, Dr. Harrow was an Edmund W. Gordon MacArthur Foundation Fellow for 21st Century Learning and Assessment. Dr. Harrow's research and teaching interests focus on helping advance digital media and learning in schools. I'll turn it over to Dr. Anderson to introduce our second panelist, Emma Bratton.
Hello, everyone. I have the honor of introducing our panelist, Emma Bratton. Emma is the Director of Digital Learning with the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation. In this role, Emma leverages her 22 years of experience as a former Chief Technology Officer, digital learning specialist, digital learning coach with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, school librarian, and a classroom teacher. All of these roles support Emma's drive to inform research and application in the K-12 setting and beyond. Emma works collaboratively with educators and stakeholders to support the effective implementation of instructional practices to make learning accessible for all students, focusing primarily on the use of existing and emerging technologies to amplify teaching and learning in North Carolina and beyond. We welcome you, Emma.
And our final panelist will be Dr. Golnaz Erastapor-Ergens. Dr. Erastapor-Ergens is Assistant Professor of Learning Sciences at Clemson University, Director of the IDEA Lab, and Vice President of the International Society for Quantitative Ethnography. She's a former middle school computer science teacher and high school mathematics teacher, and earned her bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, master's degree in mathematics education from Columbia University Teachers College, and an MS and PhD in learning sciences from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research focuses on designing immersive, inclusive digital learning environments that integrate computer science and critical pedagogies, and using learning analytics to make sense of how learners engage with digital technologies. In her design-based research, she engages in participatory research methods that actively involve teachers, students, and community partners working together to co-design digital learning environments that serve their communities. So we welcome all of our panelists and look forward to what they have to share with us, and look forward to some lively discussion after. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Harrow to share with us our first talk for this evening.
Okay, can you hear me? Is it loud enough, do you think? Okay.
Can you pull the mic?
Oh, wait. Do this. Here we go. Okay, how's that better? Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for the introduction as well. So briefly, I'm going to just kind of get right into this. My background in 4A. Oops, hang on a minute. I need to move something. Sorry, guys. Here we go. So again, my background in foray into research and teaching related to AI and ethics started when I was a Watt faculty fellow, as Luke announced when we first began. I spent 1 year exploring AI and its potential with other interested interdisciplinary faculty. And that led to working with a team from the College of Education and CCAS on a Department of Ed funded research project where we were developing artificial intelligence or expert systems focused on I'm so sorry guys, I got to start one more time, my apologies. So anyway, in this research project, we were focused on working with people from CCAS on a Department of Ed funded research project where we were developing artificial intelligence and expert systems to recommend a path for educators for STEM-related teacher professional learning courses. And I learned more about training data sets and recommender systems on that project. At the same time, I was co-developing an AI plus ethics curriculum with middle school teachers for middle school students. And I facilitated a number of roundtable discussions and attended AI and teaching conferences. And more recently, I moderated a graduate student discussion panel on the same topic. So in each case, I learned a little bit more about the implications of artificial intelligence. And on the slide that you see on the right side, you see the output from a generative AI that I asked to provide an image of Danny Harrow at Clemson University. This is what it created. As you can see, this is not really me. So my main contribution for our discussion tonight will be a primary focus on graduate student education and artificial intelligence. So that said, my thoughts are largely based on the curriculum work that I did with the career and tech ed teachers in Wisconsin as part of a consulting project where I helped them develop an 18-week semester-long AI and ethics curriculum, drawing on several earlier curriculums that were produced by MIT, AI for All education research groups, and a number of other research to practice groups. Working through this curriculum focused on teaching middle schoolers and their teachers about machine learning, AI, and ethics embedded in project-based learning, robotics, and creative activities deepened my thinking, and frankly, it began to scare me a little bit about what the future with AI holds. So I came into this discussion an interest in using AI for teaching and research, largely unaware of how long it's actually been explored and used in computer science, in the military, as conversation agents, and the number of decades where researchers were developing applications for cyber-physical and robotic uses, or as virtual assistants, or ways that it's been used most recently for human AI teaming. And although this seems obvious now, I was also largely unaware until the last couple of years how the research and development in this space is primarily funded or directed by technology giants who certainly have different values and intentions when developing, promoting, and using AI. So when I look at the predicted future of AI, I'm excited about its potential to do good in terms of safety and mobility and transportation, more accurate diagnosis or drug development in the medical community, the potential to thwart terrorist attacks, ways that generative AI can perhaps improve human creativity, or the idea that we will be able to use voiced search options instead of just text in the very near future. And I'm especially excited to read about the number of scholars and large tech companies and some legislators talking about ways that we might advance responsible and ethical use through education and policies and oversight and public awareness. I think the reason that we're here tonight is because we don't currently have the exact answers regarding AI and ethics in all situations, but we are thinking much more deeply about this. Of course, there are broad ethical implications with the advancement of AI, such as what happens when we think we're talking to another human and it's a machine? Is it okay to use video surveillance and facial recognition to ticket or arrest people? And if AI is predictive, what if it's used to incorrectly predict criminal behavior? Does an AI algorithm consider race, gender, and culture? And how do we know if something is real? What about the redistribution of wealth created by machines that has enormous workforce and power implications? And do we need to worry about self-driving cars with incorrect data being hazardous on the road, or AI bots that assist in propagating false information, or online privacy that might be breached and used against humans? What about the large amount of carbon dioxide that is used to train a single large AI model? The question of how to prepare children, our students, and adults for the future that is already here is not easy. Today's AI technologies pose challenges in learning about and using them, as they're fundamentally different than earlier generations of innovative tech, such as Web 2.0. With Web 2.0, of course, there was this promise of collaboration and connectivity and distributed cognition and greater access to learning, and a lot of those promises came true. With AI, there are deep concerns about algorithms that may cause filter bubbles, where we can't see that these filter bubbles are thrusting us into echo chambers that limit access to information and opinion formation. The potential and the promise is different because AI technologies are mostly hidden from users and constantly adapt interactions based on user behaviors. So the use of AI in everyday educational contexts raises a number of ethical challenges, which is why we're here this evening. One major concern is bias, as AI algorithms are only as good as the data that they're trained on, and I know Gold's going to talk a little bit more about that. Another concern is privacy. AI systems can easily collect a lot of data about students, such as their learning habits and their test scores. And students using AI to complete work need to understand what data that they might be sharing and with whom and for what reason. It's important to ensure that this data is collected and used responsibly, of course, with consent. And this consent has been defined in the literature as algorithmic awareness, where users know that a dynamic system is in place to personalize and customize this information. Butcher, and I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly, did some groundbreaking work in 2017 that showed that users developed theories of why, for example, social media sites target you with particular ads, and these imagined theories that may not be real drive our decision making. Cotter talks about ways influencers use algorithms to exert power and increase their visibility. And Butcher suggests an answer to increasing algorithmic awareness, moving from these imagined theories to reality and not falling victim to some of this unwanted algorithmic power, is through algorithmic evaluation, which points back to the need to teach critical media literacy to students. So I'd like to provide a short example of how using AI has shifted what I do in my courses. I teach a course called every other year or so, called A Critical Look at Social Media Games and Emerging Technologies. And at the beginning of the semester, this semester, the day after the AI and Ethics teaching conference that I attended on this campus, I was wondering, can and should students be allowed to use AI to contribute to discussions in written work? So I questioned, would this lead to more plagiarism or cheating? Would their responses in my course be more or less accurate? What about privacy considerations or copyright or algorithmic bias? My approach was to change my syllabus actually after the first day of class. My students and I had an open discussion. We set ground rules. We discussed the ethical concerns and the advantages and disadvantages of using AI. And we came to a common agreement regarding complete transparency on my part and the part of the students. And of course, I integrated a number of AI research articles, which would be fairly easy to integrate, I would argue, into any discipline today. So as an instructor, I was transparent about how I used AI in the course prep, and I noted it on Canvas. So this was a course that met synchronously, but a HyFlex course, and Canvas sort of tracked what we were doing. So for example, I always do one assignment that's a video assignment that's relevant to what we're doing in this video. Happened to be on future of AI. It was a frontline video. And when I asked Copilot to write questions that I could pose after students watched the 2-hour documentary, you'll note that my prompt was discussion questions for this particular video. The output was divided into 7 headings. Don't worry about all of the text. 7 headings with incredibly accurate sub-questions, very much in line with what I'd like students to consider when responding. This took all of 3 to 5 minutes, followed by me scanning everything for accuracy, and another 10 minutes or so of doing some revisions. This saved me several hours of time, and I would argue that it actually produced a much better result. In terms of student transparency, and so I'm mimicking what the students might have typed in it as a prompt, we agreed that they needed to include a statement on all of their presentations and written work that stated if and how they used AI, including Grammarly, if they used it, along with the prompt or the prompts that they used. So students in my course tend to turn in 3 reflection assignments along with presentations and projects. And they're asked to critically analyze research articles. And here you can see my prompt in Gemini, which is the old Google Bard. They just released Gemini. Didn't help me out. The response was, I'm just a language model, so I can't help you with that. However, when I used Copilot, this was the response that I got. So as a student, I'm not arguing that this is the best summary for this article. However, it does provide a general summary for them to work from. And I do know that some instructors might say that using AI in this way offloads a lot of initial critical thinking that they want their students to engage in. When I changed the word summarize to analyze in the prompt, I was given a really great outline to begin my analysis. Now remember, I'm mirroring what my students might prompt a generative AI to do. The output continues here as well. The impact and broader implications for this article, I think, are relatively weak. So obviously there would have to be a lot of critical thinking that went into the outline that they received, evaluating it. So as faculty, students, and community members, we need to ask ourselves, is this ethical? Is this inspiration? Is it okay to use generative AI for organization as a way to scaffold learning and offload some of the cognitive work? Do we need to take seriously a new pedagogical and paradigm shift? The learning intentions for each course or project for students obviously varies. In my opinion, there's not one right answer to how to approach using AI in graduate education. However, I would argue that every scholar and instructor has a responsibility to broach its use in their discipline and mentor students appropriately or learn from and with the students. So if I was asked, based on what the current research and information available out there is, what are ethical considerations for using AI in higher ed, my response would include complete transparency, where instructors and students reveal how they're using it in coursework. Responsible and ethical use that should be taught and practiced to help students realize ways to leverage AI for supports. I think students and adults certainly need to know about legal considerations related to plagiarism and privacy and be aware of what their accountability is if they breach them. I also think that program areas need to have open conversations and transparent policies for how AI can or cannot be used to assist with things like comprehensive exams or dissertations. And I do believe that's going to vary by program area. And of course, research integrity with AI needs to be explored in research or seminar courses that include attention to whether co-authoring or data sharing with AI is acceptable within a given field, because that also varies. And finally, in all of the items above, source checking and source checking of any sort of output is extremely important. And with that, I will stop here.
All right, Dr. Bratton, we're ready for you. We're going to get your screen set up. All right, we can see you in the room.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much for being here with me this evening and allowing me to join you via Zoom. I am excited to share with you a little bit of my work at the Friday Institute, which is part of the College of Ed at NC State. If you're not familiar with us here in Raleigh, we really bring together the research, the policy, and the practice to think about what that looks like pre-K through 22 and into the workforce as well. And so as the director of digital learning, I have been able to think about what AI looks like for us in practice and what we can do with it with our educators and with our students. And so our vision really has been around empowering educators, fostering that AI literacy, and transforming teaching and learning with the power of AI and what that can be. So over the last year or so, we've really been dedicated to working with teachers, principals, school district leaders, state leaders. I'm at a national conference this week, really thinking about what that looks like, what that can be, as we work together to understand how this can make an impact and change the way that education happens in our schools and in our districts. So, of course, we've been following, just like our teachers or educators have been, what's going on in the news around AI. And some of the things are really interesting and alarming as well. So if you look at the highlight on the left-hand side of the screen there, I didn't know that AI could read my brainwaves with over 75% accuracy. The output from the left-hand side, the input from the left-hand side could then generate by AI the output on the right-hand side. Or that a lot of the images of our musician here who passed away in the 90s, IZ from Hawaii, are pretty much all of them fake online. Or the realities of what cybersecurity is going to look like in our schools and districts when it comes to how AI is improving how people will be phished and scammed throughout in the future. The other piece I think is important here too is the conversation around, is AI going to replace us as educators and what that looks like? So there are a couple of headlines that I'm sharing here where we have AI being the primary teacher and the adult, the human in the room is more of the assistant or aide, the facilitator for the students. So there's lots of conversations that teachers are having about what this looks like and is this reality and when is this coming to their school and to their classroom. As we've been working with folks over the last year, we've been collecting some research data around their level of awareness about AI in education. And over the past 8 months, we've really seen these things grow around their understanding and awareness of its prevalence in education, their understanding of what AI fluency and AI literacy can be, how it's available as resources in education as well, how it can be used to leverage their productivity and their function, their lesson planning, their design, things like that for themselves and for students. I think really interesting here is understanding that they are incorporating more and more AI into their practice. They're adapting materials because of AI. That's a growing practice as well. And some folks as well are also communicating the benefits and concerns of AI to families and to others. But to counter that a little bit, we have to understand, is there a systematic approach in place for them to better understand AI's impact on content standards, on pedagogy and teaching strategies, to better understand and have a systematic approach to evaluate the benefits and concerns of AI, or even the effectiveness of using it in their classroom. And you can see from this data that overwhelmingly we're finding that there is not anything like that in place. We hear about state guidance, we hear about district and classroom policies, but a systematic approach to make sure that we're doing things for students that are aligned with best practices around data privacy and security, kind of alarmingly, no. They're using it, but we don't have this guidance and guardrails in place to make sure we're doing a responsible and safe job with that in our schools and classrooms. Then this final data point I'll share with you from this survey about the policies and procedures. We know that this data is a little bit skewed because we had people who were participating in our AI professional development. So we would expect really some of these numbers to be closer to the left-hand side, that they're no or not sure, that they have a system in place to address these challenges or these concerns that might happen in their classrooms, in their schools and districts when it comes to AI integration. I did mention just a minute ago that we have some state guidance. 8 of our states across the country have adopted guidance, whether it's legislatively required or something that the state education agency put effort behind and developed. We expect that we will see more and more of that evolve over the next year. And we have continued to work with state leaders to think about what those policies can be, what the guidance and guardrails can be. But we're also really aware that a lot of the folks who are developing the policies, a lot of the folks who are thinking about what those guidance and guardrails can be, are not representative of our students and our communities of color. We know that a lot of historically represented employees at the state education agency, at the district level leadership, at our school leadership are predominantly white. And so we know that we have some concern about whose voice and who is being represented in this type of guidance that's being developed. And so making sure that we have the right folks who have a voice at the table, who are help driving those decisions about what's the right thing for our students in our schools and in our classrooms, to make sure that it's representative of them and their needs as well. I wanted to share just quickly with you this video of a Google Doc that I had taken about 3 months ago. I ran across the Google Doc that had syllabi policy for AI. And here's about 82 pages of folks who have taken the guidance and guardrails and developed their own guidance for their classrooms. And I want to play that just again because I want to emphasize the variability that exists here by these individuals who's been willing to include their examples from their syllabus. Some had zero restriction whatsoever in their classrooms for how that AI could be used. Some were very locked down and restrictive. And I think it's important for us to understand that our students are experiencing these classrooms where in some places it's going to be okay, and in other places it's not, where Grammarly might be considered AI, and in some places it's not going to be flagged. And so understanding that we have some context and a setting here where the wide variability really has an impact on our students as they move in and out of those different places. And so how we're transparent and we're clear about what that looks like is really a critical skill and competency that we need to make sure that our students have. I ran across this post recently from a colleague of mine where he had asked if his students were using AI, and you can read the post here. He was teaching philosophy, and they offered their students amnesty if they admitted to using ChatGPT. Overwhelmingly, you can see of the 25 students, 23 of them immediately replied, yes, they are using it. And so what does that mean for us as we're thinking about making sure that students have the knowledge and the skills? It's helping them navigate the maze of AI. And I think this is a really powerful framework that we've developed at the Friday Institute that applies for K-12, it applies for K-12 students, it applies for our practitioners, and it's also helpful for those people who are in ed tech as well. When you're thinking about approaching AI and whether we can use it and be responsible and safe with it and ethical with it in our schools and classrooms, we want to make sure that we're monitoring for data privacy. So we're looking at how that data is being collected and stored and where that lives and what that looks like and how long that lasts. Is there some data management protocols that they're transparent about on these ed tech platforms? Are they assessing for accuracy? So is the information that it's providing correct, or has the machine made an error in its output? Are we zeroing in on the bias of AI and what its output is? Are we thinking about who's not represented and what voice isn't there as part of the output? Or is the algorithm biased in and of itself? Something for us to consider. And then thinking about evaluating the value. What does it look like for me as an educator or for my learners? How would that be used and what would that look like? for my productivity, for my lesson planning, or for having my students use that tool itself. So as that translates for us into practice, we really want to think about then how we're leveraging AI for student-centered learning, how we can take that framework that I just shared with you to navigate AI for students, especially in the K-12 setting when so many of the platforms that are available for us right now are really only available for students who are 13 and older. And so if we're navigating for students, we're examining those types of things and considering if it's safe and ethical, responsible for them to use. Are we navigating it with students and side by side? So we have kind of the I do, we do, and the navigating by students would be the you do part, where once they have the knowledge and skills on the necessary competencies to be safe and responsible with AI, that there is some sense of autonomy and options that they have in order to use the AI systems themselves. Of course, in the safe and secure environment that we can create in our classroom. Much of this work that has been developed at the Friday Institute is built around the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights. If you haven't had a chance to dig into that, it was published actually in November of 2022. And what I find really powerful about it is it provides some real life examples of each of these 5 principles around how we should be thinking about and using AI and how we should be creating structures and systems, both from the ed tech standpoint and also from the digital leading and learning standpoint in education. So I want to just briefly touch on each of these because I think from the K-12 perspective and the higher ed perspective as well, it's important for us to be thinking about what are we introducing and integrating into our classrooms. So on the left-hand side, we need safe and effective systems with AI. It should be safe and effective. It should do no harm in essence. And so when we're thinking about the right platform, we want to make sure that that individuals are not discriminated against because of the AI systems that we might be using. And so we know that there are systems that are by their creation, they are not going to be safe for our students to be using, that the output that they might produce is going to be harmful. It might lead to bullying. It might lead to other incidents or generate information that wouldn't be appropriate and safe for our students to have access to. The second one being algorithmic discrimination. We should be protected against that. Obviously, AI then should not discriminate unjustly. We see that oftentimes when we hear about these AI checkers, that we can detect AI if we run the essay through the AI detector tool. And we know that's not the case. But we also know that based upon certain keywords or the way that the algorithm might have been built, that there are by proxy discriminations that are put in place that we need to be mindful and careful of when we're thinking about what that looks like with our students and how they might experience discrimination because of their identity or the profile that they might have. The next being data privacy. We want to make sure that the data is secure, that it's protected. We often hear about databases that are compromised, our profiles that might be compromised, information about ourselves that has been leaked to the dark web. We don't know what's happening with the data that's being collected through these AI systems. And so often in K-12, we know that there are classes or teachers who innocently might be inputting data into any of these systems, and then it's out there and it can't be retracted. And so where does that data live? What does that look like? How do we know what's happening with our data? A colleague of mine who I highly respect, she's a CTO in one of the school districts here in North Carolina. She talks about how we are paying with something, and usually that's our data privacy that we're paying if we're not actually paying for that platform. And so while data privacy can be a huge challenge for us and thinking about what that looks like, it's an important key component of being safe and responsible and ethical with using AI. The next piece that I think is really important is notice and explanation. So users should know when AI is being used, and they should know how it affects them as well. So often I'm speaking with EdTech AI developers who don't feel any sense of responsibility that they should be making others aware or their users aware that AI is being used. I talked to a couple of gentlemen this afternoon about their platform that interacts with families, with parents. So a parent calls the school, and in essence, they end up with a reply from an AI generated platform without being notified that that is AI. I think that's very questionable. I think that's very concerning. And I think that there is responsibility that the ed tech folks have if they expect to be in the K-12 environment, that there would be some notice and explanation. I think anecdotally, recently I saw a colleague of mine had posted about writing letters of recommendation using AI, which you often hear about as a great example. I usually question, have you provided in your letter of recommendation a notice that said you created this using AI? Oftentimes the response is no, we didn't provide that type of information, didn't provide that type of disclaimer that we used AI to help us generate that letter. But curiously enough, in this story that a colleague shared, the student who had requested the letter of recommendation clearly understood that this professor would be using AI to generate some of that content for his letter, because he even provided the prompts that could be used to access a quality letter of recommendation using a ChatGPT or a Claude large language model for them. And so it's just an interesting case to think about how students are becoming savvy and clearly understand whether there's notice and explanation there that it's happening in the outputs and in the work that's around them. And then finally, the human alternatives consideration and fallback. Users can opt out and they can interact with a person. I often will put in human when I get caught into a chatbot loop and I can't get out of it and I'm not getting the help that I need on a software platform. And that's my default when I used to press 0 in order to access the operator when I'm on a phone call. Now I'll type in the word human until hopefully a human will come online and be able to engage with me. We need to be able to provide these alternatives and fallback options to keep the human in the loop, to keep the teacher in the loop, so that when we're thinking about if the students are generating AI and turning that in as their work, and we're grading using AI, when do we have the human in the loop? And what does that look like to make sure that the teachers and faculty are still actively engaged, our students are still actively engaged, both in their critical thinking and in their creation themselves. And so making sure that we're mindful not only of how we are using it, but we also are mindful that sometimes there are times when folks won't want to use AI, and there should be an opt-out option in order to interact with a person. I really appreciate these 5 different priority areas when I'm thinking about talking to district leaders, school leaders, classroom teacher leaders around what this looks like when they're designing their own policies and guidance and guardrails for what this can be in their schools and in their districts. I also appreciate the recently published National Educational Technology Plan. It just came out in January, because I think something that is really important for us to recognize is that AI is being used in our school, but it's also not being used in many of our schools. We know that there's so much that's happening on teachers' plates and on district leaders' plates that they may be ignoring AI until they find it to be, quote, the right time to dig in and to invest into what that can be. What I appreciate, though, about the NETP and how it can align with what we're doing with AI is I feel like it addresses the digital divide that can be that will begin to widen if we're not really mindful about how we can adopt AI in our schools and in our practice. And so the NETP is built around the digital use divide, which is how students are actively using the tools and the systems in their classrooms. I have often argued that part of digital equity is making sure that we have highly trained teachers and educators who are able to integrate technology effectively. And for those students that don't have that type of an educator in their classroom or in their school, it is putting them at a tremendous disadvantage. And we're seeing the same thing with AI too, as it rolls out in our different spaces. The digital use divide for how students can engage with this is going to look tremendously different in those places where they might have passive engagement and be consumers rather than users and creators and producers. The digital design divide is the second part of the NETP, where we have professional learning and supports for our educators to be able to lead with this based on the learning that they have. And so how they're able to construct their lessons, their materials, what that looks like for them to be able to be those technology and digital leaders in their classrooms is really critical to make sure that the design divide is doesn't widen. And then that third piece is the digital access divide. We know that in so many of our K-12 environments, and having been a former CTO in a local school district, I know the conversations that folks are having about whether we should give access to AI, if we should be blocking this for certain grade levels or for all of our students. Should teachers have access and not the students, and what that looks like. So the accessibility of AI in our schools and our districts and our communities as well is a really important thing for us to think about in order to make sure that we don't widen that gap that exists there with digital equity. I mentioned briefly student engagement and how so often they can be passive consumers rather than active producers and creators. And so one of the things that I would leave you with this afternoon is really thinking about, with AI, in the age of AI, what does our actual student engagement look like? What is that manifestation or display of motivation? And I think what's important for me is that we are not flat-footed as we think about tackling AI in our schools and in our classrooms. We know what good pedagogy and good teaching looks like. We know what it's like to authentically grade students for their mastery of learning. And so what I would leave you with today are these 4 different things about how, when we're effectively thinking about engaging students in our classrooms with AI, we know that the student engagement piece is really critical, because that is the predictor of student success in school. So often we hear, and we're concerned about social media and emerging technologies, that students are lonely and they're alienated, but that student engagement piece can really be the antidote for what that is. So often we see students compliant in their classrooms. I've heard often that AI will lead to cheating. AI is going to lead to students becoming lazy. But if we as educators are able to authentically engage our students, we know that it can counteract that boredom, that low achievement, and even the dropout rates for our students. And then I'd finally leave you with this, especially from the College of Ed perspective, that positively affected, student engagement is positively affected by teacher pedagogy and other classroom interventions. We know what this looks like and can be in our classrooms when we embrace and we integrate effective digital learning frameworks and tools. And so I think when we are thinking about AI in the classroom, it's important for us to make sure that we're falling back on those good practices, that we're incorporating them, and we're thinking about how we can make sure that our students who are often underrepresented in these specific data sciences and machine learning and computer science trades, that we're including them in those conversations, that we're preparing them by providing them with the opportunities to learn, and that we are authentically engaging each of our students so that they all can be successful. Thank you.
All right. All right. On the third one, on an evening panel, are you all still awake? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's do this.
Well, I can go a little off script and start now. So Danny Harrow and I actually worked together on a lot of these projects. So she did an overview of a lot of ethical privacy considerations, kind of this broad overview. And Emma, thank you for your talk about teachers and classrooms and sort of the state of AI and where we're going. I appreciate that as well. You also gave some anecdotal evidence and some stories. I was just, one of the things that you said are about disclaimers, using when you're using AI to use disclaimers. I was in Nashville a month ago in an Uber, and the Uber driver was listening to the radio, and I had never heard this before, but there were some advertisements. There was a disclaimer before the advertisement. I don't know if anyone's heard this before, but the disclaimer was, this radio station uses AI for their advertisements, and we are not responsible for any content you might hear from this moment on. I'm not joking, that's what it says. And in my head, I was thinking, who AI? Like, who is AI? Who developed this? Who's putting this on? If you're not responsible, then who's responsible? So that your comment on that, Emma, made me think of that experience. And that's related to, I think, what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to take a slightly different angle and dig a little deep into one specific issue with AI, and that's bias and discrimination with AI. Now I'm going to talk about how that relates to my work and also some of the scholars who are talking about this and have been talking about this for the last 7 or 8 years. So anyone use Google Trends? So Google Trends can be a really useful tool just to see the popularity of things, because how many of y'all use Google to search things? 99% of the world uses Google to search things. So it's a good proxy measure for how popular things are becoming. So I typed in just AI from 2022 to 2023, and you can see there's a huge jump just in the last year. And you can probably guess what that big jump was. ChatGPT. So when ChatGPT came out and generative AI came out, right, all of a sudden AI is everywhere in the news. So Google and some other large companies are racing to develop these AI tools. All of a sudden, it's really in our face. And Google and other companies are saying, you know, we're going to try to do our best. We're going to apply AI to some of the world's biggest challenges, right? We're paying attention to these societal challenges, and we're going to use AI to help solve a lot of the world's big problems. And I think that's partially true, but there's a flip side to this. This is sort of an older news article now, but it's still pretty true when this came out. Google's image search has a massive celebrity sexism problem. So this particular problem has since been revisited, and you won't necessarily find it if you Google these specific things. But one of the things that people started noticing, this example right here, search for a male actor, and you get their film history, their CV, their resume, everything they've done. When it comes to female actors, it was more about their bodies. So this is just one example of how AI here is the autocomplete that you use. So when you start to type something, right, it'll start to complete. So here's an example of a scholar who actually started investigating this years ago. So AI, one example of AI is this autocomplete in search engines. And so this scholar, Safiya Noble, wrote a book about this. Her story was, I meant to start my timer to make sure that, to make sure we have time for discussion. I'm really interested in the discussion, so I'll try to go through this quickly. But one of the things that she discovered, her scholarship is based partially on her lived experience. So her story in this book is she has a daughter, and her nieces were visiting, and they're all African-American girls. And so she Googled Black girls to see, you know, what are Black girls up to? I'm older, I don't really know now. So what are they up to? And instead, she was faced with a lot of negative, stereotypical search results. And she wasn't getting the same thing when you Google white girls. And that motivated her to start investigating who are developing these AI algorithms, for what purposes, and are they paying attention to how harmful they can be, especially to marginalized populations. Another example of a scholar is Joy Buolamwini. She put out this film called Coded Bias. It's available on Netflix, I think still. But this is a film that's now widely popular. She also went on now to, she's the leader of something called the Algorithmic Justice League. And they look into these issues. So some of the research she did when she was a graduate student at MIT, she started investigating these facial recognition systems. So it's on all our phones now. It's pretty ubiquitous. We use facial recognition for a lot of things. When she started using it on her face, it couldn't recognize her face as a Black woman, as a darker skinned woman. And so she started doing some research and started looking at all the different algorithms that were out there for facial recognition, from IBM, from Google, from these other big companies, from Amazon, and she found the same results. Especially for Black women, it was the lowest recognition. So it would misclassify Black women as male or couldn't recognize them at all. And the image here you're seeing is she literally put on a white mask and it could recognize her better. And so all of her work is published along with other scholars. And so it's not just about misclassification or not being recognized by facial recognition, it's what is being done with these algorithms. So what actually happens when these algorithms are used to make decisions? So this is similar to one of Emma's slides where we can see it's in the news. So if you want to dig into the news and the research, it is out there now. And these scholars that I'm showing you discovered this 7-8 years ago, but now we're seeing more and more of it as ChatGPT is coming out and generative AI is coming out. So some of the consequences for this misclassification, for example, of facial recognition, is housing discrimination. So this was one news article, how algorithms, ad targeting, and other new technologies threaten fair housing laws. So if these sort of algorithms are misclassifying people, right, then there's the potential, if you're using them, to make the wrong decisions, right? So another example is access denied, faulty automated background checks freeze out renters. So if we're using AI to build these algorithms to search through a bunch of data and make decisions, whether you get a house or whether you don't get a house, but these algorithms are not checked, or they're faulty, or they're discriminatory, or they're biased, then we're going to continually perpetuate this harm that's been going on historically for a long time. This one on the bottom says, algorithms should have made courts more fair. So now we're going from housing into the court system. What went wrong? So this headline here says a 2011, why am I looking here? A 2011 Kentucky law requires judges to consult an algorithm when deciding whether defendants must post cash bail. More whites were allowed to go home, but not blacks. So again, we're saying a similar thing. And why is this happening? Specifically with AI? Well, we live in a world that's riddled with inequities and histories, right? We have a lot of histories of certain people having more privileges than others. That's a fact. And what happens in the AI world, then we get data from this world, right? So we have some sort of data. We have spreadsheets, we have information, we have something, right? And what happens there is we're taking kind of a representation of the world. And some of the issues that can come into play there is a sampling bias. So how many, for example, the facial recognition system, how many white faces are you using versus how many people of color or Black faces, right? And if you're not using as many people of color, then that AI system is not going to be as well trained to recognize the nuances in people's faces. So there's that sampling bias, and then there's also this inequity or bias that's baked into the data. So if we have some historical problems, which we do, especially with policing, right? People of color are not proportionally, so our policing is not proportionate. So that means that, for example, our prisons are have a higher population of people of color than not. So what happens is when that data is then taken without consideration, you're just re-perpetuating some of those biases. So then that data gets into an algorithm, right? And then that algorithm also has issues because we have to think about, well, who is developing the algorithm? So Emma, some of the stuff that you were talking about that we have to consider is just saying AI. When I hear AI, I'm thinking, okay, who is behind the AI? There's always a human. So if you're chatting with a chatbot and you say human, you have to remember that that AI is also created by a human. It might just be free right now, but somebody at some point or some group of people programmed that AI. And we forget that. We kind of just offload the responsibility into the AI and don't really think about who created that and for what purposes. For profit, for power, for what? To help people? We don't really know a lot of the time. So that part is opaque to us. And then there's also this idea of testing. So the people that make those choices to test the algorithm, who are they involving in the testing? What tools are they using? And what's the history of those tools? And then, as I mentioned before, then decisions get made based on those algorithms. And those decisions could enforce or reinforce discrimination. Discrimination is nothing new, but with these algorithms, they're happening faster, on monitor and and larger scales than we've seen before. That's the thing that's different. But it's not all doom and gloom. All right, so if we pay attention to these things, and if we have these conversations, there's benefits, as we can see, to using AI for education. This example actually comes straight from one of my graduate students and her daughter. She was doing a science project using Canva. If you're familiar with Canva, it's a digital graphic tool. And Canva now has generative AI embedded in it, just like everything else, pretty much. So on the left, she searched for somebody who looked like her who was riding a bicycle. And when she didn't use the GAI in Canva, it's called Magic Media. Has anyone ever used that? It's called Magic Media. When she didn't use it, this is what she saw. But then when she did use it on the right, this is what she saw. And the image on the right was more catered towards her, what she looked like, what her friends looked like. And that sort of brought her more engaged into the thing that she was developing for school. ChatGPT is another example that we brought up today. So again, one of the benefits, if we think about all the things that I mentioned before, right? One of the benefits is that students can access a lot of information from home. So students who didn't have access maybe to a lot of education, or someone whose parent is not home, right, now has access to ChatGPT with understanding how to use it, understanding prompts, as Emma said, right? So this is, again, another student. I want to learn about decimals, fantastic choice. Now let me tailor it to your discussion level. So that's a huge thing in education, this kind of personalized learning. So a fourth grader to be able to use ChatGPT, tell them what level they are, and then ChatGPT using more emojis, using language that's more appropriate, giving examples like pizza so it can understand. So this kind of personalization is the flip side of the stereotyped and harm, right? To be able to have enough data in that AI algorithm, enough people that are representative of our multicultural world and our multiracial world to be able to come in and have feedback on some of these tools. So some of the work, very briefly, that I'm doing is developing these tools for kids from K through 12. So we develop ways for not kids to just learn about AI and machine learning and not just build their own, but also thinking about questioning, dismantling, reimagining, and rebuilding what these AI tools can look like. This is a quote from one of the kids that we've worked with. So they watched the Coded Bias video and they went through our program. So one of the things she said was, in the video we watched, the girl realized the computer didn't recognize her face until she put her white mask on. Wasn't fair because most of the pictures of faces were white men. This is a fourth grader, so this was a ding moment for her. And we encourage children, and I think we should encourage all learners to question, dismantle, reimagine, and rebuild some of these AI tools. And that's a little bit, I know we don't have a ton of time, but that's a little bit of the work that I do. And I think that's really important if we want to change the ways in which we think about AI and sort of take a step back. One way to do that is to educate young learners and learners of all ages about these sorts of issues. Thank you. Oh, yeah, oh my gosh. No, I don't need it.
All right, well, thanks again to all of our panelists. At this point, yeah, we can give another round of applause. We'll open it up for discussion. So there's many of us in the room here that may want to engage with our panelists, but certainly many who may be online as well. We've got about 100 folks online in our Zoom room who are a part of this conversation. And so we have Dr. Anderson online who will help moderate some of the chat discussion if questions come in from online. If you're listening and have a question you'd like to pose to the panelists, please feel free to use the chat function to do that. But we can also have folks unmute and raise their voice as well. And certainly those in the room can raise a hand and we'll do the same. I will try to, if you're going to raise a question from the room, I'll walk around with the mic just so that folks at home or on Zoom can hear the question that's being raised. So I'll facilitate that to the extent that I can. But at this point, we can just have open discussion and questions and conversation together about these issues that we've heard about. question. All right, we've got one in the room. We'll start there. That'll give folks online an opportunity to type in a question if you have some.
So like we talked about integrating like students into AI, but how can you integrate like the older generation, like older teachers, like to get them to understand what AI is and how it works?
How can you help old folks like me is what I heard him say, but I'm not sure that's exactly what that was.
Talking about K-12, K-12 or college instructors, both? I'm sorry, who asked the question?
Yeah, just like all teachers in general.
K-12 and college
Well,
instructors, old people.
That's right. Well, for one thing, there certainly has to be a lot of professional development, and I think you're seeing that happen. I mean, this is relatively new, it's taking on quickly. So you're seeing professional development, professional learning offered in K-12 environments. At the college level, same thing. It's going to likely take some time, but some of it is awareness, playing around with it, experimenting, having discussions, showing examples of what can be done in terms of scaffolds for student supports, that sort of thing. I also think it depends on your discipline. So there are people who are naturally going to be much more interested because as soon as they see what AI can do to facilitate some of their own learning and think about ways that they can guide their students or talk with students about what ways students are using it. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like it can just be like overwhelming for someone if they're all learning about this at one time.
Yeah.
How can you like piece it up for someone that hasn't been around technology for their whole life?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. So I do this with 4th and 5th graders. So I think we can learn from that as well. I think that has really helped me understand how to talk about AI and machine learning with people who don't know, don't care, don't have the background, are interested, but are afraid maybe of technology or are afraid of the kind of big headlines they're hearing. So one way is to make this stuff more accessible by changing the language. So we don't have to say machine learning, right? That may scare people, but using these kinds of diagrams and understanding that what data you put in, right, is going to affect how the machine learns. But again, like even 4th graders can understand, like you have different classes, right? You have different categories, and having these things be more accessible and more public. So having these like diagrams or games or apps or something like that is something that is being done in research and needs to be done more, I think. It's just, there's not a lot out there that distills it down, I think.
Yeah, and I would just chime in and say I'm a big fan of some research from the 60s where we have the diffusion of innovation model, so often talked about with digital learning, where you have those folks who are the early innovators and the early adopters, and they're at the forefront. And then you have the bell curve where the early and the late majority of folks who are going to adopt this. And then you have those laggards or those folks who are really reluctant, and some of them are just waiting for retirement before they move into anything new in their classrooms. And so with those folks, with really all folks, I'm really mindful of the types of questions they're asking, because the other side of that research for the diffusion of innovation are the stages of adoption. So like my colleagues have said, we're really thinking about awareness and interest. So if they're asking questions like, what is this? And what's going on? And what's that tool? They're at that stage. But then the next 2 stages are the evaluation and trial. And so are they willing to figure out and think about what this tool could look like in their classroom, and how do I do this? And how would that look? And what would students do? And what are the benefits for me? Before they then move on to maybe full stage adoption of it, which is, did I do a good job with this? And have I really purely integrated this into what my classroom space can be? And I've reached that stage of adoption. And then I would argue that there's a 6th stage of that adoption, which actually becomes the advocacy, where we're talking about the AI in my work and what that is looking like. And that's that peer-to-peer learning that means a lot to our educators when they're able to connect with others who are doing that very same thing in their classroom. And so if we're able to help coach people through those 5 to 6 stages, then we're really going to see the benefit and the transformation of what that looks like in those classrooms.
Thank you all for those answers. We've got another question from the room here.
Yeah, so I have a 2-part question. The first part would be that, do we have any like good data that these AI models are discriminating more than the typical individual, like maybe relative to some standard? And if not to that, like, how do we, and if we don't know that yet, how do we figure that out? Like, how do we figure out if they are actually discriminating more than the general population?
All right, great question about discrimination. I'm gonna run across the room. And I'm guessing let Dr. Rathore answer that one.
Sure, I can answer that. Yeah, there's lots of research on that. So Timnit Gubru is another scholar, Sethia Noble, Kathy O'Neill, Virginia Eubanks. There's a ton of people who have looked at data and tested these AI facial recognition systems and other sort of, I mean, there's lots of different AI and there's lots of different algorithms used that we categorize as AI. So they do different things. But I think just the output alone is not enough. Like, okay, so you didn't recognize me, so what? It's really what people do with that information. So for example, if that information is used to give you a loan, for example, you know, like if all of a sudden there's an algorithm that says you can get a loan and you can't get a loan, and it's based on this sort of historic information of like, well, you live in this neighborhood, you know, so you can't get this loan. Well, historically, African Americans live in that neighborhood. So that sort of thing then gets complicated and related. And so there's tons of studies that have been done related to those kinds of experiences. So it's really about what people do, people who are making these decisions, how much they're relying on that AI, and how much they're sort of checking to see where that data are coming from. And not, it just gets a little bit more problematic when we're now in this world where the AI is learning from itself and there's not as much supervision. So that's also a problem. So it's just going to keep kind of scraping data and there's not necessarily people looking to see where that data are coming from. That's also like another issue there. But there's research you can read where they list like exactly what sort of data they used and what AI they looked at and sort of what the output was. So if that helps. Did you have a two-part?
What's the second one?
So, great, thank you. Other comments to add?
I was just gonna say as an aside, which is that this isn't completely aligned with your question, but the New York Times ran an article not long ago that talked about what some of the banking institutions use to determine who gets a mortgage. And part of their algorithm is how much battery power you have in your phone when you are at the institution. So they'll ask some sort of question. They're able to determine the amount of battery power that you have on your phone. And that goes into the algorithm for whether or not you would likely pay it back. So I'd have to find the article again. It was fascinating, and I thought I personally wouldn't get a loan.
Everyone's checking their battery.
I also dropped into the chat for folks that who are online, especially a recent article from Bloomberg. And what I like about it is that it's so visual that you can see right away where it is generating that bias. And so I think it's really alarming for you to be able to take a look at some of the research that's published there. Of course, it's not an academic research article, but I think it translates really interestingly to respond to your question there. And I would also suggest, if you're interested in learning more about that, the reason why the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, those 5 different principles are in place, are really because of the tremendous amount of bias that's being experienced by folks, especially in underrepresented communities for women and people of color. So just encourage you to check out that. And I'm happy to drop that in the link in the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you. For those that don't have the link, if you were to just search Bloomberg 2023 generative AI bias, I think you'd get the article that Ms. Bratton was referencing. I think there was one other question in the room. I haven't seen any come in by way of chat, and thanks to those online who are hanging with us while there was a technical issue with your being able to see us. I think you can still hear us, but we're glad to have you back. And we've got one other question in the room here.
So this is more of a practitioner question. The presentations were amazing and they focused very much on the classroom. My colleague and I have a joint question. We work in college learning centers and we're curious about any wisdom or like research that's being done about how college learning centers deal with the reality of AI being used in student learning, and yet how do we transition like our tutors or our training to match the change, but also recognizing that institutions haven't quite set up their own understanding of what's allowable, what's not, and just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on like spaces of academics that are not necessarily a classroom. We would just love to hear your thoughts there. So thank you.
Spaces of academics that are not necessarily classrooms, like
Learning centers, academics were outside of the classroom.
tutoring.
Yeah, tutoring.
And is your
supplemental
question,
instruction, just
is your question about how to incorporate AI into that, or?
just sure, just your thoughts in general.
Just
The
thoughts.
experts letting us know.
Like, can we, if the university hasn't made a blanket policy or statement, some professors say yes, some say no.
Like what considerations
Can
should
we-
we be
Ethical
making?
considerations on like, can we have our tutors use it if some.
Yeah,
So that's honestly not the space that I do a lot of research or work in, but I would say that I would check with the college, university, or whatever institution they're affiliated with the policy. So, and the policies may change certainly from even from class to class. I know this university has a number of policies that we can adopt and adapt for the type of teaching that we do, and it does vary between the different units. I don't see any reason why, if a student comes in with a particular policy, wouldn't want to encourage the use of AI as a scaffold, as a way of thinking beyond just inspiration, but to really help them with whatever it is they're wanting to do. I mean, so again, it's not work that I typically do in learning spaces around colleges. It's a really good question.
Yeah, I would say those sort of more informal learning spaces. I think of maker spaces or digital, learning spaces or libraries, right? They have a lot of demo things or things that people can touch or interact with or test. So that might be something almost like a museum where you have these opportunities for these learners to engage in AI that's guided and scaffolded, and then see where that goes. Like, are students or learners in that space using it? Are they interested in it? And then I would say, this is the lens I take a lot, is why not involve those people in that decision making? So who is using that space? What learners, what do they want? What is their experience with AI? And how can you cater that space to them? That doesn't always work. I mean, I work with kids and you ask them and they're like, I don't know. So you might get that response, but engaging, the people who you're serving that space, the people who you're serving, involving them in those decisions could be helpful as well.
You may also want to look at some of the AI for all curriculums that are up to the high school level, and I know you're talking about post-high school, but that might even provide some inspiration for activities and ways that, so I think about students who are using creative generative AIs in artwork. The curriculums developed for the high school level are really quite sophisticated, and something like that, again, would give you an idea of maybe a starting point.
I'd also suggest that there are several really nice rubrics or flowcharts that say when it's appropriate to use AI and when it should not be used at all. And so it can really coach and guide along that spectrum of it would be okay in this scenario or it wouldn't be okay. Matt Miller, who has the blog and the website Ditch the Textbook, he's done a really great job of looking at, is this cheating? And providing a spectrum and some questions for conversation. The other thing is I'm coaching folks in that kind of a space in our schools and districts. I'm also often challenging them with the question of what is it that we value when we're making this decision, and have our values shifted, or should they shift because of the technology that we have? So do we value X because that's what we've always valued and what we've always done and how we learned and we went through that process? Or are we able to shift that and grow that and evolve that? And what do we kind of predict or anticipate could shift in our values because of something like AI and the tools that we now have that are so accessible for us? And so I would just highly recommend having some of those internal conversations about the values and why we have those values and what they're rooted in. and what communities would say in response to that, and what the value is there.
Thank you. Well, I'll say thanks once again to our panelists for their contributions to this conversation, for challenging our thinking, and for inviting us to think more expansively and differently about AI and its ethical applications to and considerations for education. We're running up against the time clock. I think we've used most of our time, and so I'm going to turn it over to Emily Elizabeth to close us out.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys. Hello, everyone in the room. And to those of you on Zoom, we had a bit of a computer failure, so thanks for hanging with us there. Thank you for a wonderful session to our panelists, both in person and online. And of course, a big thank you to the College of Education, who of course is sponsoring this event. My name is Emily Elizabeth. I'm the Assistant Director for the Rutland Institute for Ethics, and I have the pleasure of saying some thank yous for our TIDE conference. We want to say a special thank you to some people that you saw on your way in if you were in the room. But our Greek partners are campus leaders who help us out with our events, and they exemplify ethical leadership and an outstanding commitment to service. And today we had two of those Greek partners who are sitting over here right now, who are members of our fraternity partner, which is Beta Upsilon Chi. That's a national Christian fraternity that exists for the purpose of establishing brotherhood and unity among college men based in the common bond of Jesus Christ. We want to thank you both for being here. Our other sessions have also been served by members of our sorority partner, which is Delta Phi Lambda. They're advocates for Asian awareness, and they empower leaders through their values-based programs and hope to forge everlasting sisterhood through diverse and shared experiences. So we're very thankful for your service. We want to mention what great leaders they are on campus. As well, before you leave, we want to be sure that if this is the first time you've ever interacted with the Rutland Institute for Ethics, that it doesn't have to be your last. And in fact, we hope that it is the very beginning. To students that are with us, both online as well as in person, your presence here today actually brings you one step closer to becoming a Distinguished Ethics Scholar, whether or not you knew it. Our Distinguished Ethics Scholars program encourages and recognizes Clemson students, both undergraduate and graduate students, engaged in co-curricular education focused on ethics, ethical leadership, and ethical decision-making. And the program allows students to earn one of two scholarly designations, so our Distinguished Ethics Scholars or our Ethics Scholars, that allows you to enhance your graduation regalia with a cord or a medallion, but also allows you to earn a co-curricular transcript. It's one of the very few programs on campus that you can have on your resume that says, I took the time to think about what ethics means for me in my context. If you guys want information about this program or our events calendar, you can always visit us at www.clemson.edu/ethics, or there's a QR code right outside this room. You can scan it to our link tree. From there, you can learn more about our scholars program, see all of our TIDE conference. We have 3 more sessions to go this week. And of course, connect with us on Instagram and LinkedIn to have everything you need at your fingertips, which is exactly what we're talking about all week with AI. So we appreciate you guys. We are so excited, and we hope that you continue to join us on our journey and think more about what makes good decisions and what makes good decisions in our spaces. So with that, we appreciate you. Thank you for being present and your commitment to ethical conversation. Go forth and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.